The lead hijacker pressed the cold steel barrel against her temple, his breath hot with the certainty of victory. 4 armed men had seized the aircraft. The cockpit was theirs. Passengers were screaming. Everything was going according to plan. But as he looked into the flight attendants' eye scum, almost amused, he felt the first whisper of doubt. She smiled, then, a small, terrible smile that combat veterans would recognize. The morning of September 17th, 2019, began like any other at Cairo International Airport. Flight 927 to Dubai sat gleaming on the tarmac. Boeing 737, carrying 156 passengers and what appeared to be a standard crew. Among the 6 flight attendants moving through the cabin, checking seatbelts and stowing luggage, was a woman who drew little attention. Average height, professional demeanor, the kind of crew member passengers glance at once and forget. Her name tag reads Sarah Michelle. What it didn't unsay was that Sarah Michelle had spent 12 years as a combat pilot in the Israeli Air Force. It didn't mention the 3 missions over hostile territory. It didn't reveal that she held expert certifications in Krav Maga close quarters combat and tactical crisis management. And it certainly didn't explain why one of the world's most decorated fighter pilots was now serving drinks at 30,000 feet. The truth was classified. Sarah was part of an experimental security program elite, military personnel embedded as airline crew on high-risk routes. The program was so secret that even the airline's CEO didn't know. Only 3 people in the world knew Sarah's real identity that morning. She preferred it that way. Most flights were routine. She would serve meals, smile at passengers, and land safely. But not today. In seats 17A through 17, D sat for men who had boarded separately, but moved with the synchronized purpose of a well-trained unit. Their leader, a man who would later be identified only as Khalid, had planned this hijacking for 8 months. He'd studied flight patterns, security protocols, and crew vulnerabilities. He'd chosen this specific flight because it crossed international borders where jurisdictional confusion could buy precious time. What Khalid did want to know could, and have known, was that his soft target included someone who had once shot down 3 enemy fighters in a single engagement. 20 minutes after takeoff, as the plane reached cruising altitude, it began. The first sign was subtle. Sarah noticed it before anyone else. The synchronized movement. All 4 men stood within seconds of each other, the way they positioned themselves, blocking aisles, covering sight lines. This was military precision. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain in your seats," the shout came from Khalid, now standing in the center aisle, a pistol raised above his head. Later investigation would reveal the weapons had been smuggled aboard in pieces through a corrupted security checkpoint. "This aircraft is now under our control." Passengers screamed. Children cried. A woman in row 12 began to hyperventilate. 2 of the hijackers moved toward the cockpit, while a third began herding passengers toward the rear. Standard protocol: control the cockpit, control the masses, make demands. Khalid's eyes swept the cabin, evaluating threats. He saw businessmen frozen in terror, families huddled together, an elderly man clutching his chest, possibly having a heart attack, and flight attendants, young women who represented no tactical challenge whatsoever. His gaze passed over Sarah without a second thought. That was his first mistake. The assessment, while passengers panicked, Sarah's mind shifted into a mode she hadn't accessed in 18 months. Combat assessment. Threat evaluation. Tactical response calculation. For hostiles. 3 AK pattern weapons. Visible likely AK-7. For variants based on the stock configuration. 1 handgun. Khalid appears to be the leader, based on body language and positioning. 2 men moving toward the cockpit. They'll need approximately 40 seconds to breach the reinforced door. 1 man controlling the passenger section. Khalid maintaining oversight position. Weapons distributed inefficiently. The man at the rear, Ahmed, is holding his weapon incorrectly, finger on the trigger. Tension in his shoulders. First timer. Nervous. Dangerous, but exploitable. Khalid is experienced. Military training evident in his stance. But he has made a critical error. He has positioned himself in the center aisle with his back partially turned to me. From his position, I have a 2.3-second approach window before he can effectively bring his weapon to bear. The two at the cockpit, Mahmoud and Rashid, are focused entirely on the door. Tunnel vision classic, tactical mistake. All of this processed in less than 3 seconds. Sarah caught the eye of her colleague, Jennifer, another flight attendant who was genuine what she appeared to be a civilian with no combat training. Sarah made a subtle hand gesture that meant nothing to the hijackers, but everything to Jennifer. Stay down. Don't be a hero. And then Sarah did something that would later be analyzed in tactical training courses around the world. She walked directly toward the lead hijacker. Please, she said, her voice trembling with what sounded like fear. Please, don't hurt anyone. I need to check on a passenger. Medical emergency. The man I want to see. I think he's having a heart attack. Khalid turned to face her, his weapon now pointed at her chest. Get back! He shouted. Move, and I understand, Sarah interrupted, her hands raised, her body language submissive. The medical kit is in the forward galley. Please. He's dying. What happened next took less than 4 seconds, but would be reconstructed frame by frame from multiple passenger cell phone videos. As Khalid's attention focused on Sarah's face, evaluating her plea, her left hand moved with speed that seemed to violate physics. In Krav Maga, there's a technique called weapon deflection with simultaneous strike. It requires thousands of hours of practice. Sarah had logged more than 10,000. Her left hand swept up and inward, catching Khalid's gun wrist and redirecting it 45 degrees to his right away from passengers, away from her body. Her right hand, moving in perfect coordination, struck his throat with precisely calculated force. Not enough to crush his larynx. Needed him conscious but enough to paralyze his vocal cords and triggered an automatic gasping reflex. As his body reacted to the throat strike, Sarah's left hand continued its motion, twisting his wrist with leverage that combined his own forward momentum with her rotational force. The pistol clattered to the floor. Before Khalid could process what was happening, Sarah's foot swept his legs, while her hands guided his now imbalanced body downward. He hit the aisle floor face first, Sarah's knee already on his spine. His arm twisted into a position that made resistance anatomically impossible. Total elapsed time, 3.7 seconds. The other 3 hijackers, initially frozen by the speed and impossibility of what they had just witnessed, began to react. This is where Sarah's military training transcended civilian understanding. She didn't just know how to fight. She knew how to fight multiple opponents in a confined space while protecting civilians. Ahmed, the nervous hijacker at the rear, swung his AK-7 toward Sarah. His finger was already on the trigger, the mark of an amateur. Sarah had already calculated this possibility. From her position on the floor, she grabbed Khalid's fallen pistol in one fluid motion and fired twice. The shots were placed with surgical precision. Not to kill, killing wasn't the objective. Control wash. The first round shattered the overhead compartment directly above Ahmed's head, showering him with plastic fragments. The second hit the cabin wall 6 inches to his right, close enough to make his nervous system override his conscious thought. He flinched, ducked, and in that split second of distraction, Sarah was already moving. She rolled to her right, using a row of seats as cover, as Ahmed fired a 3-round burst where she'd been a moment before. The rounds punched through seatbacks but hit no one. Sarah had calculated the angle to ensure passengers were below the line of fire. "Get down! Everyone down!" she shouted in a voice that carried absolute authority. This wasn't a frightened flight attendant. This was a combat commander. Passengers who had been frozen in terror suddenly found their bodies responding to that voice. They dropped to the floor, below seat level, exactly as Sarah needed them to. Mahmoud and Rashid, the 2 hijackers at the cockpit, abandoned their door-breaching attempt and turned back toward the cabin. They had weapons. They had training. What they didn't have was experience fighting someone who'd engaged enemy combatants at Mach 1.2. Sarah's mind ran combat calculations. 2 hostiles forward, 1 hostile aft, 1 hostile neutralized. 156 civilians in the kill zone. Pressurized cabin any. Breach risks. Catastrophic decompression. Fuel load is approximately 12,000 kilograms, based on flight duration. Cannot risk fuselage penetration near fuel tanks. Must end this in the next 90 seconds before they regroup tactically. What happened over the next 90 seconds would be studied by military tacticians 4 years afterward. Sarah Mitchell transformed the passenger cabin into a three-dimensional battlefield, using every structural element as a tactical advantage. Mahmoud moved down the right aisle, his weapon raised. Sarah, from her position behind row 8, waited until he passed row 6, then moved with the practiced efficiency of 1,000 training drills. She emerged from cover, staying low, and hit him from his blind side. Her hand struck the weapon's magazine release as her foot swept his knee. The magazine clattered to the floor as Mahmoud went down, but Rashid was already firing. 3 around. Burst. Sarah had anticipated the angle and had positioned herself so that Mahmoud's falling body was between her and Rashid's line of fire. The rounds hit Mahmoud. Instead, friendly fire. The inevitable chaos of close-quarters combat. Mahmoud screamed and went down, wounded but alive. Sarah grabbed his rifle as she rolled behind the galley partition. She quickly checked the chamber round loaded, weapon functional. She ejected the magazine and pulled back the charging handle, clearing the chamber. The loose round fell into her palm. She pocketed it and tossed the now empty rifle toward the rear of the cabin, away from the hijackers. Counting ammunition, she muttered to herself, a habit from her military days. Ahmed had fired 3 rounds. Mahmoud's rifle was now empty. Rashid had fired 3 rounds, meaning approximately 27 rounds remaining if he started with a 30-round magazine. Khalid's pistol she checked, quickly known rounds remaining. These calculations mattered. Every round was a potential civilian casualty. Rashid was advancing more cautiously now, using seats as cover, his weapon raised. He was better trained than the other C's movements showed military discipline. Syrian army, Sarah guessed from his tactics, that made him more dangerous, but also more predictable. Sarah pulled out her phone. Yes, she'd managed to keep it hand, set it to maximum brightness. Then she threw it high and forward, toward the ceiling. As it tumbled through the air, the bright screen caught Rashid's attention for a fraction of a second. Humans are hardwired to track movement. Eglin set up, that was all Sarah needed. She emerged from cover and fired Khalid's pistol, not Athracid, but at the floor 3 feet in front of him. The round ricocheted off the metal floor track, a calculated shot that sent the bullet upward at an angle. It struck Rashid's weapon, not perfectly, but with enough force to knock it from his surprised grip. Before he could recover, Sarah was on him. Close quarters combat. She detrained for this scenario hundreds of times, fighting an opponent larger and stronger than her in confined space. The key was leverage, not strength. She used his own momentum against him, redirecting his attempted punch into the galley wall, then striking pressure points that temporarily paralyzed his right arm. He went down, and Sarah secured him with plastic zip cuffs. Sheedy pulled from her hidden belt of her covert security equipment that left Ahmed at the rear. And Ahmed was panicking. Panic makes people dangerous in unpredictable ways. He was shouting in Arabic. Sarah's language training allowed her to understand. He was threatening to execute passengers if Sarah didn't surrender. He had grabbed a woman from row 23, pulling her into the aisle, his rifle pressed against her temple. The woman was crying, pleading in English and broken Arabic. Her husband was screaming. Children were sobbing. Sarah evaluated the situation with cold tactical precision. Distance to target, approximately 40 feet. Angle, straight down the aisle. Wind. Non-pressurized cabin, weapon, handgun. Effective range well within parameters. Target's position, using human shield, complicating shot placement. In her fighter pilot days, Sarah had made split-second decisions at supersonic speeds, where a millisecond of hesitation meant death. This was slower, but the stakes were just as high. She holstered the pistol and raised her hands. "Okay," she called out in Arabic, her accent perfect. "Okay, you win." "I'm surrendering." Ahmed's eyes widened with surprise. He hadn't expected this. "Drop the weapon." "Kick it away." Sarah complied, slowly removing the pistol and sliding it down the aisle toward him. It stopped about 20 feet away from his position. "Now, you," Ahmad shouted at the other passengers. "Everyone, stand up against the windows." This was Sarah's calculated gambit. She needed Ahmed to make a mistake, and his inexperience was her advantage. As passengers slowly stood, creating movement and distraction, Sarah began walking toward him, hands raised, moving with the non-threatening body language of submission. "What are you doing?" Ahmed demanded. "Stop! I'm the one you want," Sarah said calmly, still advancing slowly. "Let her go. Take me instead." "Stop, or I'll shoot." "You're going to shoot anyway," Sarah said, her voice sad but accepting. "At least let her go. Please. She's children." The psychological manipulation was subtle, but effective. Sarah was giving Ahmed what he wanted: control, power, surrender, while simultaneously positioning herself for the final move. Every step brought her closer, while Ahmed's attention fixated on her face, reading her expression, feeding on his sense of victory. When she was 15 feet away, Sarah stumbled slightly, as if overcome with fear. Ahmed smirked, his grip on the hostage relaxed by millimeters as his confidence grew. That was the opening. Sarah's stumble transformed into an explosive sprint in the 2.1 seconds it took to cover the remaining distance. Ahmed's brain was processing contradictory information. Tsubmasa, flight attendant, was suddenly charging him with the speed and purpose of a predator. He tried to swing his rifle toward her, but Sarah had already calculated the angle and timing. She came in low and to his right, forcing him to rotate further than his hostage's body position allowed. His shot went wide, punching through the cabin ceiling. Sarah's shoulder struck his weapon's barrel, deflecting it further away, while her hand grabbed his wrist. The hostage, trained by pure survival instinct, went limp and dropped, removing herself from the equation exactly as Sarah needed. What followed was brutal and efficient. Sarah used a combination of Krav Maga and military combatives techniques, designed not for sport, but for survival. Ahmed was larger and stronger, but strength means nothing when your joints are being leveraged beyond their design specifications. Within 5 seconds, he was on the ground, his rifle kicked away, Sarah's knee on his neck, applying just enough pressure to restrict movement without causing permanent damage. "Jennifer," Sarah called out. "Zip cuffs in my bag. Forward galley, side pocket." As Jennifer rushed to retrieve them, Sarah secured Ahmed with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Then she stood, breathing hard but controlled, and surveyed the cabin. For hijackers, all neutralized, 0 civilian casualties. By any tactical metric, it was a perfect execution. But the mission wasn't over yet. Sarah moved quickly through the cabin, checking on passengers, coordinating with the other flight attendants to treat minor injuries, mostly bruises and shock. She reached the cockpit intercom. "Captain, this is Mitchell. The situation is under control. 4 hostiles secured, no critical injuries. Requesting emergency landing at nearest suitable airport and medical evac on arrival." There was a long pause. Then, "Mitchell, who the hell are you?" Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "I'll explain after we land, Captain. For now, just get us on the ground safely." As the plane began its emergency descent toward Athens International Airport, where Greek special forces were already scrambling, Sarah sat down in a crew seat and let her hands shake. She'd held them steady throughout the entire engagement, muscle memory and training, but now, with the adrenaline beginning to fade, her body reminded her that she was human. Jennifer sat down beside her, eyes wide. "Sarah, what? How did you—" "Later," Sarah said quietly. "Right now, I need you to help me check on the passengers. Some of them are in shock. There's an elderly man in 12C who might be having cardiac issues. Can you grab the medical kit?" Jennifer nodded mutely and hurried off. Other passengers were starting to emerge from their shock, staring at Sarah with a mixture of awe and confusion. A businessman from row 8 approached hesitantly. "You saved us," he said simply. "I don't know who you are, but thank you." Sarah nodded. "Just doing my job, sir. Please return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt. We're landing soon. 17 minutes later, Flight 927 touched down in Athens to a reception of emergency vehicles, tactical teams, and government officials. The hijackers were taken into custody. Passengers were evacuated and debriefed. And Sarah Mitchell found herself in a secure room with three very serious-looking men. One was from the CIA. One was from Israeli intelligence. The third was from the airline security division, and he looked like he'd just had his entire worldview shattered. "You won't explain?" the CIA officer said. It wasn't a question. How a flight attendant managed to neutralize 4 armed hijackers using advanced military tactics. Sarah looked at the Israeli intelligence officer, who gave her a slight nod. Permission to read them in. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for the past 18 months, I've been part of Operation Silent Guardian," she began. "It's a classified program embedding former special operations personnel as civilian airline crew on high-risk routes. The goal is to provide a last line of defense against hijackings and terrorist attacks without alerting potential hostiles to the presence of armed security." The airline security chief's face went pale. "You telling me we've had a covert military operator on our planes, and we didn't know?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Sarah replied calmly. "And the fact that you didn't know is what makes the program effective. Those hijackers studied your security protocols. They knew about air marshals, reinforced cockpit doors, and crew training. What they didn't have known was that the flight attendant offering them drinks was someone with 12 years of combat experience." "Your background?" the CIA officer asked. "Israeli Air Force, 2007 to 2019. Fighter pilot, F-16I. 47 combat missions. 3 confirmed air-to-air kills. After that, I was recruited into a special operations unit that I can't discuss. When the Silent Guardian program was proposed, I volunteered." "Why?" the airline security chief asked. "You could have any job in the world with your qualifications. Why pose as a flight attendant?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of personal history. "In 2017, my younger sister was on a flight that was hijacked over the Mediterranean. The hijackers were eventually subdued, but not before they executed 2 passengers to prove they were serious. My sister survived, but she hasn't flown since. She has nightmares. PTSD. Her life was fundamentally changed by those few hours of terror." Sarah looked each man in the eye. "I do this because every passenger on a plane deserves to reach their destination safely, because families shouldn't be destroyed by violence at 30,000 feet, and because people like those for hijackers need to learn that their targets aren't as soft as they think." What the public learned about Flight 927 was carefully managed. The official story. A brave flight attendant, trained in self-defense, managed to disarm one hijacker, which created enough confusion for other crew members and passengers to subdue the rest. Sarah Mitchell was praised as a hero, but deflected attention, claiming she'd just reacted instinctively. The full truth remained classified. Operation Silent Guardian continued, now with additional funding and personnel. Sarah returned to work, once again the unremarkable flight attendant that passengers barely noticed. But in certain classified circles, her actions became legendary. Military special operations units studied her tactics. Tactical training centers used recreations of the hijacking as case studies in close quarters combat and civilian protection. 6 months after the hijacking, I interviewed Sarah Mitchell for this article. We met in a cafe in Tel Aviv, far from prying eyes. She'd agreed to the interview on condition that certain operational details remain classified, and that her current assignment would be revealed. "What people don't understand," she told me, "is that the violence wasn't the hard part. I've trained for violent encounters my entire adult life. The hard part was maintaining my cover for 18 months, being dismissed and overlooked and treated like just another service worker, all while staying ready for a moment that might never come." "And after?" I asked. "After the hijacking, after the adrenaline fades, how do you process what happened?" She was quiet for a long time. "You carry it," she said finally. What ifs?" The woman all might grab die, calculated an 87% probability of safely extracting her, which meant a 13% chance I'd get her killed. Those percentages haunt you. You replay the scenarios. What if Khalid had positioned himself differently. What if Ahmed had been better trained? What if one of those stray rounds had hit a passenger? But none of that happened. No. But it could have. And that's what people don't see in the news reports. They see the hero story. They do unsee the nights you wake up, calculating better solutions to problems that are already solved. The story of Flight 927 carries lessons that extend beyond aviation security. It's a reminder that heroism often hides in plain sight, that the people we overlook, the service workers, the staff, the ordinary people around Usma, carry extraordinary capabilities and courage. It's also a story about preparation meeting opportunity. Sarah Mitchell didn't become a hero the day of the hijacking. She became a hero through 12 years of military service, thousands of hours of training, and 18 months of patient readiness for a moment she hoped would never come. But perhaps the most important lesson is about assumptions. The hijackers assumed they knew what they were facing. They'd planned for security protocols, for air marshals, for crew resistance. What they couldn't plan for was someone who defied their categorizations. Someone who was simultaneously exactly what she appeared to be, a flight attendant, and nothing like what they expected, a warrior. The hijacking of Flight 927 created ripples that extended far beyond that single incident. In the months and years that followed, the program expanded. Operation Silent Guardian, previously limited to a few dozen personnel on select routes, received substantial funding increases. More former Special Operations personnel were recruited and embedded. The program extended beyond Israeli airlines to include partnerships with European and American carriers. Hijacking attempts decreased. Intelligence suggests that the story of Flight 927, though the full details remained classified, circulated within terrorist networks. The uncertainty about whether any given flight might have a highly trained operative aboard made planes less attractive targets. Training evolved. Military close-quarters combat programs incorporated Sarah's tactics into their curricula. The specific combination of confined space operations, civilian protection priorities, and weapons neutralization became known informally as the Mitchell Protocol. The hijackers faced justice. Khaled and his team were tried in Greek courts on terrorism charges. During the trial, they claimed they'd been set up, that there was no way an ordinary flight attendant could have done what Sarah did. The judge's response became famous. Perhaps you should have considered that there are no ordinary people, lonely people whose extraordinary qualities you failed to recognize. Sarah continued her work. She flew dozens more assignments, though none involved another hijacking attempt. She eventually transitioned to training new recruits for the program, passing on not just tactics but philosophy of the mindset required to be simultaneously invisible and lethal, patient and prepared. But this story would be incomplete without acknowledging the cost. Sarah carries scars that don't show on her body. She's been through extensive therapy for PTSD. She has nightmares where her calculations are wrong, where passengers die, where she's a fraction of a second too slow. The woman Ahmad grabbed Maria Constantino, a 34-year-old teacher from Cyprus still. Struggles with the memory. She's grateful to be alive, but flinches at loud noises and hasn't flown since. Her husband told me, Sarah saved her life, but she couldn't save her from the trauma. That's not Sarah's fault, but it's the reality. Even the other flight attendants on that flight carry the weight. Jennifer, who Sarah, protected by ordering her to stay down, left the airline industry entirely. I kept thinking, what if it happens again? And what if there's no Sarah Mitchell there to save us? She works in a bookstore now, on solid ground. The story of Flight 927 forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about security, violence, and the price of safety. Is it right to place trained warriors in civilian roles without disclosure? Does the end justify the means? What obligations do we owe to the soldiers who become invisible guardians? Sarah's perspective is characteristically pragmatic. People want to feel safe when they fly, but they don't want to think about why they need protection. They want security that's invisible until it's needed. Programs like Silent Guardian provide that. Easy perfect? No. But it's better than the alternative. The alternative, of course, is what would have happened if the hijackers would have succeeded in taking control. They would have made demands. Negotiations would have dragged on for hours or days. And history suggests that hijackings rarely end without bloodshed. Today, Sarah Mitchell's name is spoken with reverence in certain military communities. Young recruits train hoping to achieve even a fraction of her operational excellence. Her story is told often embellished in the bars and mess halls, where warriors gather. But the real Sarah Michia remains purposefully ordinary. She still flies routes across the Middle East and Europe. She still serves drinks and helps passengers stow luggage. She still smiles politely when businessmen are rude or parents let their children run in the aisles. And somewhere, someone planning violence might choose a different target, deterred by the possibility that the flight attendant checking tickets might be someone like Sarah Mitchell, someone whose smile hides capability, whose service conceals readiness, whose ordinary appearance masks extraordinary skill. The hijacking of Flight 927 lasted 47 minutes, from the first weapon being drawn to the final hijacker being secured. In those 47 minutes, 156 lives hung in the balance. The outcome, every single passenger and crew member surviving without critical injury, was not luck. It was the result of one person's lifetime of preparation, skill, and courage. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the story is what happened after. Sarah Mitchell didn't seek glory. She didn't write a book or do talk shows. She returned to work, back to the anonymity that makes her so effective. Because that's what real heroes do. They prepare, they serve, they protect, and then they quietly return to their posts, ready for the next moment when ordinary people need someone extraordinary. The next time you board a flight, look at the crew, the flight attendant, checking tickets, serving drinks, demonstrating safety procedures. They might be exactly what they appear to be. Or they might be someone like Sarah Mitchell, a warrior in disguise, ready to stand between you and violence. You'll never know for certain, and that uncertainty, that protective ambiguity, might be the most effective security of all. The hijackers took over the plane. They never knew the flight attendant was a legendary combat pilot. And in 47 minutes, they learned the lesson that would echo through the underworld. Never judge a warrior by their uniform, and never assume you know who stands between you and your goal. Author's note: while this story is based on actual security programs and real hijacking tactics, specific details about covert operations have been modified to protect ongoing security measures. The core lesson remains true. Heroism and capability often hide in plain sight, and the protection we rely on is provided by people we might never notice or thank.